Today I've got a technique tip to share. We're going to be doing the Embossing Highlight Technique. So this technique is fabulous if you've got background panels that you've created and want to use on a card front. But I thought I'd quickly walk you through creating your own background panel just in case you didn't know how to. I've got some nice heavyweight watercolor paper here and some ink sprays. Now these are metallic ink sprays, so they do have that mica in them and that will give a bit of a shine. Now I started by wetting my cardstock with some clean water, and that's just going to help disperse the color and give me some washes of color in the background, because how I want to create this background panel is to layer it up, because we're going to be doing an embossing highlight technique. So I need to have a lot of color so that when I add the ink for the technique a little bit later on, you're going to be able to see it. Now you'll see what I mean when we get to that. But in the meantime, I'm just going to walk you through how to make your own panel. Now I'm only using a half sheet of this cardstock. It's huge, and this is going to be enough to give me 2 card fronts. Now you can mix these inks. So I am wanting a darker color here, so I have added some black ink spray in there and mixed it up. You could use dye inks for this technique as well. You just won't get that shimmer and shine. And you might wonder why I'm smushing the color onto the cardstock with the acetate. I'm picking it up with a piece of acetate. That's because I'm a control freak. Although I did bite the bullet here and do some ink spraying because I wanted some sharper edges and less mixy with the clean water that I'd been doing. Now I just kept building up layers, used a few different colors. Just make sure that you use colors that are going to play well together and not give you a mud kind of finish. If they aren't going to mix well, make sure that you dry them well in between. You could smush the dye inks instead. You're just going to miss that mica shimmer and shine. If you don't want too much shimmer in your background panel, then you can actually add the ink sprays without shaking them or stirring them first. And couldn't help myself. I had to make a second panel, but I'm not going to use that one today. But I had to show it to you. It was so bright. Now we're on to the technique now, and this you can use with pretty much any embossing folder that you've got. I'm using the 3D embossing folders because that nice deep impression is going to help highlight on your panel. I thought I'd start with a floral image here, and this is stunning. So just use the normal sandwich that you would for an embossing folder. You could spritz the back of the paper if you wanted first. I didn't have any problems with this cardstock cracking, but that's not going to matter anyway. Even if it does crack, it won't matter because of the technique that we're doing. Really hard to see the impression when you first sort of pull the image out of the embossing folder, but it's there. And we're going to highlight the image using some white pigment ink. This is such an easy technique and a great way to use those background panels and give yourself a really pretty but subtle image. I would recommend having a nice juicy ink pad. If you've got pigment inks, you probably already know that they do need re-inking more often than a dye ink. So typically when I get a pigment ink, I will get the re-inker as well. Another thing that you could do is use a dauber to help add the ink. I'm just being gentle here. It might not look like it, but I am pressing the ink pad directly onto the panel. And because these are ink sprays, none of that color is transferring across to my ink pad, which is lovely because that would freak me out. But if you do use inks in the background and the color transfers, just wipe your ink pad onto some paper towel or tap it onto some copy paper, and that will remove a lot of that extra color. These panels look fabulous with splatter on them because you've already got that kind of watercolor look, that splattered, splotchy look in the background. Now, I do like to cut the panels down. If I haven't cut them down to the right size initially before I do the embossing, then I will cut them down with a paper trimmer, because if I run this through my die cutting machine with a rectangle die, it's going to flatten the image. I like to use a lot of tape on the background, so I use the 1-inch wide tape, and I know that's going to help hold that panel flat. But to be honest, it wasn't that warped. This cardstock held up really well to all that water and heating that I did before. I've layered up sentiment. I wanted to make the panel itself the main focal point, but I just chose a beautiful sentiment and layered that up and adhered it directly to the front of the card. I used liquid glue because of that pigment ink. I know that not every glue will stick to that properly, so our liquid glue will really help here. And I added some beautiful mother of pearl gem sparkles. So I thought I'd take it a step further for the second panel and make a more graphic design. Something that could be used on a masculine card. Yes, I need some for my stash. And I chose the angled Mosaic embossing folder. Now, this is a very busy embossing folder. There is a lot of embossed areas and debossed areas. So that when it comes to adding the ink to this one, there's going to be more white ink covering the surface, so there's going to be less of that background panel showing. So if you think about what embossing folder you're going to use, each one is going to have a different look, a different finished look. And when I was talking about not leaving white space before, the reason I wanted a darker group of colors and no white space was because I wanted to use the white highlights of the ink to give me that white look. Whereas if I had a lot of white space in my panel, it would have been hard to see the embossed areas. Another thing I want to mention here is that shiny design paper, or like say Yupo paper and alcohol backgrounds, probably won't work very well because the pigment ink isn't really going to attach to it, but that is something that I do need to try. I found this technique from Debbie Hughes and saw Tiffany Solario using it recently as well, and it just inspired me to give it a go. It's not my normal go-to technique, so it's fun to try something different. And I did make this panel, this card, very similar to one that I shared highlighting some beautiful cardstocks. And it also used the cloud white ink in it. So I will link that in the description below, just in case you missed that video. But the fish in that one, even though the whole thing's very similar, I actually used different products. So remember that you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. You can actually reuse a layout that you like, or reuse images or colors that you like. You have my permission. Now, all together now, I have my first design using a floral panel, which has been highlighted with the white pigment ink. It doesn't pick up much of the pattern, but enough just to make that subtle picture. And the second design with the more graphic kind of embossed area, which actually picks up a lot of the pigment ink, and you can see less of the background. Let me know in the comments today if you have a favorite. I'd love to know. Till next time. Bye.
Hello there. Did that video just spark your creativity? And do you want more project ideas and inspiration videos too? Well, if you do, please make sure that you subscribe to the Altenew YouTube channel. Also, make sure that you do click that notification bell so you don't miss a video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye bye.